The dingo fence has been a remarkable natural experiment, the longest fence in the world.
The new section of the dog fence will cost $25 million and take 5 years to build.
Back in 2015, late-night hosts joked that Australia had built thousands of kilometers of fence in the middle of nowhere just to kill time.
It's the longest man-made structure in the world.
Critics called it a national chicken wire obsession.
And one of many gates in it in particular, this is the Worry Gate.
Bureaucracy gone wild. But fast forward 10 years, and nobody's laughing anymore.
A really big moment for us. It's a highlight in the middle of a very severe drought for us.
Those fences now determine which animals live, which farms survive, and even how crime cases are cracked. Stick with us, because the truth behind the wire will shock you. Australia's rabbit plague. On Christmas Day in 1859, as the sun dipped low over Victoria's Barwon Park, grazier Thomas Austin did something he thought was harmless, maybe even clever. He opened a wooden hutch and let 24 sleek European rabbits loose into the wild. A bit of sport, he laughed to friends nearby.
We're releasing the rabbits on Christmas Day, and we shall go out and hopefully shoot them all.
But that simple act would end up rewriting the land beneath their feet. What followed wasn't sport. It was an ecological explosion. Within just 20 years, those rabbits began spreading across the continent at an alarming pace, about 60 kilometers each year. They didn't just nibble grass. They stripped entire paddocks down to bare sand, devastated crops, and tanked wool yields.
And local landholders were beginning to complain bitterly that rabbits were taking over their pastoral properties and eating their crops.
By the late 1940s, aerial surveys and bounty reports showed that more than 600 million rabbits were tearing across the country, making it the largest known mammalian outbreak on land. People called it the Grey Plague. It was no longer a joke. It was a national emergency. Desperate for answers, Western Australia took the most physical approach possible: steel and sweat.
As the Great Depression hit, rabbit shooting became a national pastime, providing valuable food.
In 1897, engineers began surveying the wild cliffs near Zuidorp. A decade later, they had built the longest fence the world had ever seen. More than 2,023 miles of tightly woven galvanized mesh buried nearly a foot deep and cleared 5 yards on either side. It was known as the State Barrier Fence, though most people just called it the rabbit-proof fence.
Building a wall that was rabbit-proof was quite an exercise because they had to dig down so the rabbits couldn't easily burrow under it.
Camels carried the boundary riders who maintained it, walking 30-kilometer beats under heat that sometimes reached 45 degrees. Armed with hand-forged staples and weather-beaten grit, they patched holes one by one. But the fence couldn't hold everything. Rabbits still found their way through. It wasn't until science stepped in that the tide really turned.
It was a strain of the rabbit hemorrhagic disease, referred to simply as K5 because it originated in Korea.
In 1950, researchers released the myxoma virus. Within 2 seasons, rabbit populations crashed by over 90%, but nature pushes back. Some rabbits developed resistance, and the numbers began creeping up again. So in 1995, Australia struck again, this time with calicivirus, also known as RHDV.
It's a virus that only affects rabbits. It's spread via biting insects, but it can also be spread from rabbit to rabbit.
In drier regions, it cut populations by 9 out of every 10 rabbits. These weren't cures, but each viral wave bought more time and made the fence more of a backup shield than a frontline defense. And while the rabbits were dying, economists were counting. In 2023, an analysis by the Center for Invasive Species Solutions, based on earlier models from the University of New England, found that the fence had saved roughly $5 billion Australian dollars in avoided damage to pastures and wool yields. That's 10 times more than what was ever spent maintaining it.
They drove Australia to the brink of economic ruin, and farmers resorted to ever more desperate measures.
Not many critics could argue with numbers like that, but not everyone saw victory. The fence cut through Nyangumarta and Wangatha country, severing sacred song lines and water routes that had guided desert peoples for thousands of years. In the Pilbara, oral histories describe families reaching the strange wire that cut the world in two. lifting children and dogs over just to keep moving with the seasons. Modern satellite studies have shown that the fence changed even the sky. By altering the color of vegetation and how the land holds heat, it's likely even shifted local rainfall patterns. Australia learned two brutal truths. First, no matter how fast humans build, invasive species move faster. By the time the last post was set, the rabbits were already far beyond the fence.
And he's handed a tin of canned rabbit. I think that would have been the last straw.
Second, once wire becomes part of your economy, it's almost impossible to rip it out. Remove it, and the next drought, disease, or pest could ruin everything. So when the Gray Plague was finally slowed, politicians looked north and asked a bigger question. If a fence could slow the rabbits, what about the dingoes? Drawing the dingo line. The war with dingoes didn't begin in the bush. It started on the trading floors. In the early 1900s, wool prices began to tumble, and the reason was written in a flood of frantic telegrams from farmers. Dogs in, 10+% losses, help! The dogs they were talking about were dingoes, Australia's top predator, and the damage was no joke.
One morning, 30 lambs, small lambs, dead, all from one dog. Just went through and just bang, just a bit like that.
By spring each year, more than 1 in 10 sheep had either vanished or been ripped apart. Cartoonists mocked the crisis by drawing dingoes in tax collector uniforms, collecting a so-called dog levy from every ewe. But for graziers watching their flocks disappear, it was no laughing matter. So, in 1914, the response came in the form of pegs, wire, and sheer stubbornness. Surveyor Jack Jimbor was told to point southwest and keep going. No matter what the terrain threw at them, his teams kept building. Rivers, hills, even common sense, none of it stopped the diggers who worked through scorching 40-degree summers. They boiled tea in grease tins, slept next to coils of blazing hot wire, and earned just 2 pounds per mile. Most didn't last till lunch, but the ones who stayed did the impossible. Dragged wire across boulders, stacked logs over floodplains, and built a wall that nobody thought could be built.
The dingo fence has been a remarkable natural experiment into understanding the effects that apex predators have on ecosystems.
By 1958, it was done. The last segments locked together into a single continuous predator barrier stretching 5,614 kilometers, still the longest fence on Earth. Uncoiled, it could circle Spain twice, and it wasn't just long, it was brutal by design. Ring lock mesh stood 1.8 meters high, with barbed wire at the top and bottom. A buried skirt 30 centimeters deep stopped diggers, and bulldozed 5-meter wide paths on either side left no cover for a sneaking animal.
And its purpose is to keep dingoes out of New South Wales or out of sheep grazing lands.
The original timber posts were long gone, now replaced by tough recycled plastic that shrugs off termites. But keeping that beast of a fence alive takes an army. Across 3 states, 23 patrol officers called doggers were out in the bush. Each guard a stretch of about 300 kilometers. Their utes are stacked with 14 spare pickets, about 50 kilos of mesh, sleeves, clamps, and always a spare tire. They walk their beat twice a week, and if something snaps, satellite-linked sensors fire off an alert to Broken Hill headquarters immediately. These aren't just theory drills. In June 2024, a pack slipped through a breach on the Queensland-New South Wales border. By sunrise, 34 sheep were dead. Dozens more were wounded.
And was built to stop dingoes travelling south and killing sheep in wool-growing country.
In one night, half a family's yearly profit was gone. That's why, even though graziers complain about the upkeep levy, just over 10 cents per sheep, they pay it. Because one gap in the wire costs more than an entire year of tax. The money behind the fence is serious. Each year, it takes about 10 million Australian dollars to maintain it.
The fence is expected to provide a return on investment through fewer lost sheep and higher profits for farmers.
The cash comes from state treasuries and the grazier's levy. But it's not just money keeping the line strong, it's law. Leave a gate open and you could face 3 months in a regional jail. Cut the mesh? That's 6. But even with all its success, the fence has a darker price. What really happens when the top dog is locked out for good? The story only gets wilder from here. Life without a top predator. What really happens when you remove the top predator from an entire ecosystem? To find out, all you have to do is stand on the dingo fence. Step 100 meters east, and the desert looks faded, washed out, dry and fragile, like the life's been drained from it.
The dingo fence has been a remarkable natural experiment into understanding the effects that apex predators have on ecosystems.
But walk through the gate to the west, and suddenly the same land comes alive. Deeper greens, denser shrubs, richer shadows. The difference is so sharp it's visible from space. And that stark line is the ecological cost of pushing dingoes off half a continent. Over 32 years of satellite data from Landsat and Landcat, researchers at the University of New South Wales tracked how the land breathes on both sides of the fence. Using vegetation index models, they found a clear pattern.
To see how the removal of the apex predator might have affected the ecosystem as a whole.
On the west side, where dingoes still roam, the land recovers faster after rain. Green shoots bounce back. But on the eastern side, stripped of its apex predator, the land fades patchier and browner each time the weather dries up. The difference comes down to one thing: pressure. Dingoes keep grazers on the move. Without them, those grazers settle and eat the place bare. Red kangaroos, in particular, have exploded in number east of the fence. With no predators around to keep them moving, they stay longer in one spot, chewing plants down to ankle height and pounding the crusted soil to dust. And when a cold front hits that bare ground, the wind lifts entire paddocks into the sky. Rust-colored dust storms have drifted as far as 600 kilometers, tinting sunsets in Sydney and triggering spikes in hospital visits for asthma.
Asthma sufferers have been the subject of a clinical study using AI to create personalised treatment plans.
But it's not just dust and grass. The entire food chain rewires itself. Dingoes used to keep red fox numbers low. Now, without that check, foxes have surged, up to 5 times higher in some fenced areas. And they're efficient hunters. Studies show foxes wipe out entire nests of ground birds in a single night. Quails, masked lapwings, and even threatened skink hatchlings are disappearing. Bird songs that once filled the dunes a century ago are now gone from many eastern zones. And the kangaroo boom brings something worse than overgrazing: disease. In 2024, vets sampling kangaroos near Cunnamulla found that almost 1 in 3 carried antibodies for Wallal orbivirus, a virus linked to the blind kangaroo epidemic in the mid-90s.
Kangaroo in Horry County. Many people are wondering if it's even legal to have a kangaroo here.
That's nearly 3 times the infection rate seen in Rose, living on the dingo side of the fence. It's a textbook case of how overcrowding breeds outbreaks. Even the shape of the desert changes. Drone LiDAR scans in the Simpson and Strzelecki deserts show that dunes where dingoes roam stand up to 3 meters taller. Why? Because shrubs, left untouched by grazing mobs, pin the crests in place.
And its purpose is to keep dingoes out of New South Wales or out of sheep grazing lands.
But on the eastern side, kangaroos nibble those shrubs down, flattening the dunes and sending clouds of fine, iron-rich dust blowing across the Tasman Sea. Scientists believe this dust jumpstarts phytoplankton blooms in the Southern Ocean, blooms that feed New Zealand hoki and, down the line, wind up in supermarket fish fingers in places like Lagos. Beneath the surface, it gets even deeper. Studies show that overgrazing by kangaroos strips the soil of its leaf litter, starves fungal networks, and drains nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen. On the western side, where dingoes still hold territory, the soil holds more carbon, stronger fungi, and better conditions for mulga and acacia to sprout after rain. Without predators, that support system collapses, and the desert's tree cover starts to thin. Another quiet shift with ripple effects all the way up the carbon chain. Put all of that together, and it becomes clear. A single line of 1.8-meter wire has flipped an entire ecosystem.
Dingoes have not been present in great numbers in New South Wales for at least 80 years.
From plant growth to desert shape, from virus outbreaks to seafood supply, everything changes based on which side of the fence you stand. And while ecosystems struggled, the fence itself began to suffer. Life and death at the wire. The dingo fence might seem like a quiet line in the dirt when you're flying over it, but get down to eye level.
The government says while the fencing will go a long way in protecting both residents and tourists, it isn't foolproof.
And you'll see it's fighting for its life. Every single day it's locked in a battle against the sun, cold, and a relentless army of insects. At sunrise, ultraviolet rays start roasting the zinc coating. By midnight, cold air forces dew into the tiniest cracks, lifting off flakes of galvanizing. And the termites? They climb the fence posts, wriggle into the wire twists, and release acids that corrode it from the inside out. In early 2024, a major audit team walked the line and flagged about 1,000 kilometers as fatigue critical.
So government committed to rebuilding 1,600 kilometres of new fence line in South Australia.
Meaning if nothing changed, huge sections would collapse within 5 years. That warning triggered action. New South Wales and South Australia reached for their wallets. One of the biggest repair projects, running from the Strzelecki track to the Murray River, now carries a price tag of around 27 million Australian dollars. It's replacing old, splintering mulga posts with recycled plastic composites that termites can't chew and rot can't touch. Helicopters now sling high-tensile netting into outposts that no truck could ever reach. Crews are installing solar-powered smart gates that open for road train drivers and close behind them. No more half-latched human errors. Engineers are also going futuristic. They're trialing self-reporting mesh that threads conductive ink through a glass fiber core. If rust breaks even one strand, the circuit opens, and a dashboard in Broken Hill flashes red.
Pastoralist James Morgan has 5 million acres north and south of the dog fence and is looking forward to the new one.
Meanwhile, graziers have discovered that motion-activated lights and sirens powered by those same solar panels help scare off dogs at known road crossings. But tech doesn't always beat weather. In the Australian outback, 1 hour of summer rain can drop 200 millimeters, enough to turn a dry creek into a raging torrent.
More rain on the way for you throughout the morning and afternoon. Gloomy skies and a top of 19 degrees.
In January 2023, floods tore a 32-kilometre hole near the South Australia-New South Wales border. Contractors had to prioritize towns, so graziers were left to jury-rig their fences with cable ties, scrap mesh, and desperation. Sheep prices slipped. One landowner eventually put his station up for sale.
A 32-kilometre hole in the wild dog fence has left his business vulnerable to pests.
He couldn't afford to wait another season for a proper fix.
The dog migration has already begun. It is the reason we're selling.
And when the floods fade, another problem rolls in. Feral camels. About 500,000 of them drift south during droughts, searching for water troughs. One large bull can flatten 20 fence posts in a single night. These days, dawn patrols often start in the sky. Drones with infrared cameras scan the lines, beaming back fresh damage coordinates to a phone app before the sun even rises. Some owners bury vibration sensors right into the wire. One strong jolt, and the modem at the homestead chirps. Others take a simpler approach. Solar strobes now light up known camel corridors, hoping that sudden bursts of light will spook thirsty giants into changing course and leaving the fence alone. Even with all the hardware, the dog fence would fall without human hands. Across New South Wales and South Australia, 23 men known as doggers maintain the line in rotating shifts, 3 weeks on, 1 week off. Each one carries 14 spare pickets, 50 kilos of mesh, tire repair kits, a crimping tool, and a cooler full of frozen oranges, the only fruit that lasts a week without a fridge. At night, they camp out by the wire, tuning into personal playlists on old radios that echo out into empty scrubland. One writer told Australian Geographic, "The hardest thing is being on your own." He added that new satellite check-ins and coastal breaks between runs help keep blokes from going bush in the head. One lesser-known section, about 50 kilometers east of Bathurst, hides something stranger, a double-gated compound protecting the Australian facility for taphonomic experimental research. Inside, more than 70 human bodies lie under eucalyptus trees. They're donated to science. Researchers study how skin contracts, how insects behave, how bodies break down. Data now used in homicide courts worldwide. So, when you zoom out, the story becomes clear. Every meter of wire fights the sun, wind, pests, storms, wildlife, and time. Every failed post invites wild dogs, camel damage, and economic stress. And every new upgrade buys only a little breathing room.
Out with the old and in with the new. Fencing contractor David Miller and his team construct a shiny new one.
The question no one's ignoring anymore is no longer if the dog fence will evolve, but how fast it needs to.
The dingo fence has been a remarkable natural experiment to understanding the effects that apex predators have on ecosystems.
Innovation at the fence line. Predator fences used to be blunt instruments, miles of wire meant to keep everything out, no matter the cost. But that's changing fast. All across Australia, a new generation of engineers and ecologists is transforming these once rigid barriers into precision tools that stop one threat without making 10 new ones. And it's working. Take the New Haven Wildlife Sanctuary in the Northern Territory.
So government committed to rebuilding 1,600 kilometres of new fence line in South Australia.
In 2018, the Australian Wildlife Conservancy wrapped the entire former cattle station in 44 kilometres of feral cat-proof fencing. This isn't your average wire. It's topped with a floppy overhang that cats physically cannot climb.
Predator-proof fence has a very small mesh to keep things from climbing through, buried into the ground so that nothing can dig under, and it has a hood so that nothing can climb over.
Inside this protected zone, animals that had vanished locally are now making a comeback. Bilbies, mala, and central rock rats, gone for decades, are breeding again. According to AWC modeling, the mala population alone could jump from around 2,400 to as many as 18,000 within 10 years.
AWC now protects some of the largest remaining populations of many of Australia's most endangered species.
Motion-triggered cameras at food trays already show the first new litters hopping through coastal grasses. Every vehicle gate is tagged with RFID and linked to a LORA network, so rangers know exactly who came in and when. It's no longer just about keeping predators out, it's about precision, accountability, and data. And sometimes the best fence is no fence at all.
The fence runs through some of the most arid and inhospitable parts of the outback.
On the south coast of New South Wales, Eurobodalla Shire tried something entirely different in 2023. They installed virtual fences on high-risk stretches of the Princes Highway. Plastic posts, spaced 25 meters apart, that only activate when headlights hit them. The moment a car approaches, the posts flash blue strobes and emit a burst of broadband noise. To kangaroos, it sounds like a predator alarm. The result? Wildlife collision reports dropped by about 90%. No wire, no digging, just a smart retrofit that saves money, prevents injuries, and keeps animals off the road. Local councils are now pushing to roll the system out across the entire highway. Amphibians posed a different challenge. Cane toads, spreading west at up to 37 kilometers a year, survive dry conditions by hogging cattle dams. So Queensland scientists used shade cloth, just 60 centimeters high, to ring fence those dams. It doesn't sound like much, but it's devastatingly effective. The toads hit the cloth, can't get through, and quickly dehydrate. Within 48 hours, they're gone. Native species like quolls can still drink freely. After just one dry season, toad numbers at pilot sites dropped by 95%. Even bats are getting help. In the wind farms of Western Victoria, CSIRO engineers fitted turbine towers with weatherproof ultrasonic speakers. In the wind farms of Western Victoria, CSIRO engineers fitted turbine towers with weatherproof ultrasonic speakers. These devices blast a distress wall in the 90 kilohertz range, a sound bats instinctively avoid. And it works. Microbat fatalities dropped by up to 91% in field trials, all without reducing energy production. The system is now recommended for every new wind farm, offering a cleaner, cheaper alternative to shutting turbines at dusk or picking up carcasses every morning. All of this innovation still builds on lessons learned from the old dingo fence. The difference is scale. Instead of blanketing thousands of kilometers, modern projects focus narrowly. Just one species, one site, one goal. Composite fence posts, made from recycled milk bottles, now resist termites and weather without needing paint. That drops lifetime maintenance costs for sanctuaries that rely on donations. Smart mesh made with conductive ink, first developed for dingo control.
From predation by wild dogs in particular, so it's very important. We couldn't operate without it.
Is being downscaled to fit wildlife zones like New Haven. If a cat cuts through a strand, the system pings a ranger before the animal even steps inside. Fence size, wire spacing, and sensor type can now be customized like prescription glasses. Tight enough to block a hopping mouse and tall enough to stop a feral goat. All of this points to a new way of thinking. Fencing doesn't have to mean fixed borders. It can be a tool that changes with time and terrain. These systems can turn on at dusk, turn off at dawn, and rely entirely on sound and light instead of physical barriers. And that's important because, as we saw earlier, traditional fences rack up massive maintenance costs through rust, storms, animal damage, and isolation. The new approach promises the same protection with far less long-term debt. Look around the world, and you'll see the same pattern repeating. A planet of fences. Fences used to separate kingdoms. Now they stretch across deserts, grasslands, and borders whenever a new threat hits a country's economy.
On this side of the fence, where the dingoes are, there's very few kangaroos.
Australia's dingo fence is just one strand in a much bigger web, and its story is playing out all over the world, from southern Africa to northern Europe. And the pattern is disturbingly familiar. Back in the 1980s, Botswana built a double-layer veterinary fence across the desert to protect its beef exports from foot and mouth disease. Then came the drought of 1983. With watering holes dry, an estimated 250,000 blue wildebeest tried to migrate to the Okavango Delta.
Stretching back some 25 miles, it will take weeks for all the wildebeest to arrive.
Just like they'd done for generations. But the fence blocked them. They piled up against the wire and died where they stood. What followed was one of the worst wildlife disasters ever recorded. Scientists named it the Fence of Death. Over the next decade, counts showed the wildebeest population had dropped by more than 90%. Biologists still call it the fastest collapse of a large mammal migration in human history, but the fence is still standing.
So wildebeest eat grass, right? For example, one of the populations that started to thrive were giraffes.
Why? Because European markets still demand it. Just like Australia's logic with the dog fence, once a line protects trade, taking it down feels riskier than keeping it up. In North America, the same problem grew quietly. In 2022, researchers used airborne LiDAR to scan the northern sage steppe, stretching across Alberta and Montana. What they found shocked everyone. On average, there's over half a kilometer of fence in every single square kilometer of prairie, 6 wires for every gravel road. GPS collars on pronghorn antelope showed that each animal runs into fences more than 220 times per year. Instead of following straight migration routes, they now zigzag endlessly, searching for any spot low enough to crawl under.
Very securely anchored into the ground so that no animals can get underneath.
But despite all this, the study found no plans, provincial or federal, to remove any of it. Just like in Australia, rusted wire is easier to ignore than to remove.
Out with the old and in with the new. The decades-old posts and wires of the South Australian section of the dog fence.
When African swine fever jumped west in 2015, Europe followed the same script. Denmark rushed to build a 5-foot-high, boar-proof fence along 70 kilometers of its border with Germany. It was finished in under a year. Slovenia, Croatia, and Hungary did the same along their rivers. The virus kept moving, but the fences stayed, snagging red deer antlers and trapping endangered lynx. Conservationists now call them ghost walls. Still, Norway announced in early 2024 that it may fence its entire border with Sweden to stop wild boar, even though they haven't calculated the cost or the environmental damage. It's all reaction first, ask questions later.
That's the top of that fence, this barbed wire, so you can see how much is buried beneath this sand dune.
Sound familiar? Even history throws up red flags. In China, scientists studied shrub species growing along the Zhuangguan section of the Great Wall. These plants don't rely on fences, roads, or animals. They rely on birds and wind to spread their seeds. But over centuries, the wall quietly split them. The plants on either side became more inbred, with less genetic diversity. 600 years of stone was enough to change their DNA. Today's steel fences could do the same in just a few decades. Every one of these stories echoes the problems of Australia's dog fence. First, fences usually go up to protect products, beef, pork, wool, before scientists can weigh in. Second, most countries don't even know how many fences they have or where they all are. And third, once a fence gets written into trade deals, insurance rates, or land values, removing it becomes harder than just pouring more money into repairs. Australia's own fence boards face this same dilemma every year. And so far, The wire always wins. Australia, the nation that built the longest pest fence on Earth, now has a chance to do something different. If it can shift or digitize even part of its massive dog fence, it could show the rest of the world a better way to do things. One where we stop and think about the damage to nature before building the next fence. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.